Hello and welcome to this special event organized on the occasion of World Elephant Day. Every year on August 12th, World Elephant Day is celebrated to turn the spotlight on these beautiful animals and to bring people together to find solutions to the kind of problems that they face. And that is what we hope to do today through this conversation. I am Nalini Ramachandran, author of the book Trumpet Calls Epic Tales of Extraordinary Elephants, published recently by Hachette India, and I'm in conversation with Nikita Dhawan, a young activist and the founder of Youth for Animals, an animal welfare initiative. She is an IUCN member, youth ambassador for Born Free Foundation, earthday.org, and she has recently won the prestigious Diana Award, which is instituted in the memory of Princess Diana. Welcome, Nikita, and thank you for agreeing to speak to me today. That's quite a powerful bio for somebody of your age.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me today. And it's an honor to speak with you as well.
Thank you, Nikita. So, I was just wondering when we grow up, one of the first things that we learn in school is E for elephant. E is for elephant. So, and while I was working on the book, I came across a lot of these stories of, ancient India and South Asia where princes and princesses grew up with elephants just like their brothers or sisters. Of course, you and I in today's age can't really boast of having this kind of an adventurous childhood. But what are your earliest memories associated with elephants? Is there some interesting anecdote?
Unfortunately, when I was younger, I didn't have as much exposure to elephants because, like so many younger children, I didn't, I saw zoos as just you can just walk around and look at animals, but I never really looked at it behind the scenes to admire how, intelligent and incredible and elephants are by themselves in the wild. So in that aspect, I wasn't as aware as I became in high school. I had done an internship with World Animal Protection India, and I was doing research on elephants and learning about how they're important in India, how they're cultural symbols. I learned about Ganesha and aspects like that, how they're used in temples and festivals. And I learned behind the scenes of that, basically things like how they go through a process called a crush, which is for 72 hours they're beaten to tame their wild spirit, and how walking on concrete floors constantly it harms their feet, and how they're shackled for hours, and then they have to go out in the scorching sun and be paraded around by so much noise, so much heat. So just learning about those things made me realize the irony and how India respects elephants, yet our actions do not reflect our words. So I wanted to sort of bridge the gap between the public's perception on what elephants were and what they meant to India and what was actually happening, because I think it's completely, valid how culturally important elephants are. As you've described in your book, you talk about, how we respect them and how they embody characteristics of India, which I think are really important, but they're not, again, reflected in how we're treating them. So that's sort of where my inspiration for elephants came from. And I started doing more research about them. And I was just really fascinated by, firstly, how similar they are to us in terms of, how they form bonds and friendships with other elephants, how they're very, intellectually complex. They grieve like humans, and they are just incredible. So that's how I became interested in elephants.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Actually, it's true, because I think the more time you spend reading about them or around them, you get to know how similar they are to us. Yeah. I remember, the book released around, I think, in December 2021. And in October 2021, there was this email from change.org that came into my inbox. And that was a signature campaign that you had started through Youth for Animals to free Shankar, one of the only two African elephants housed in an Indian zoo. I believe the other is Rambo at Mysore Zoo, and Shankar is at the National Zoological Park in Delhi. So tell me a little about, the beginnings of Youth for Animals, the Free Shankar campaign, and why elephants and why not any other animal? Was there a particular reason for that? I know you've just spoken about, what attracted you most to the animal, but yeah.
Yeah, I think for Youth for Animals, I started it during March 2020 during the pandemic. So, we were all feeling very angry and isolated, cut off from the rest of the world. It was a collective feeling we all had. And I think during that time, I was able to at least imagine how animals in captivity felt every day. So I was able to empathize with those feelings. And in this case, it's not even for their safety, like the lockdown was for us, but it was for our entertainment, for us to just look at them. And I started thinking, people say it's educative, but I don't think looking at the animal in its captive condition is going to enlighten you any further on how amazing they are in the wild. And you can look at other sources, their videos online, the internet, books. If you want to learn about animals, you can volunteer at a sanctuary. There's just so many other means for us to engage with animals. Unlike, I remember you mentioned in your book that back then you couldn't see an elephant because there was no internet, so people were more attracted to physically go see it. But now times have changed, so I think that's what made Youth for Animals sort of anti-captivity, and we started sort of empowering the youth and wanted to amplify their voices in the matter because they'll have an instrumental role in future generations. And then for Shankar, I was going through just researching regulations in India about elephant captivity. And I saw that there was a circular in 2009 by the Central Zoo Authority, which regulates all the zoos in India. And they had said that elephants are banned in zoos in India and they cannot be in exhibitions anymore. So I was, obviously that wasn't true. We have 3 elephants in the Delhi Zoo itself. So that's what sort of motivated me to go to the zoo. And I think just seeing Shankar's condition is what drew me to him. It was absolutely heartbreaking. He was swaying back and forth, which was, stereotypical movement. There was so much screaming. There was a railway line right next to him, and elephants' ears are very sensitive, so just every like 5 to 10 minutes, even it was disturbing me, and I didn't even stay there for that long. And his enclosure was barely an acre, whereas in the wild, elephants walk from 40 to 60 kilometers a day to forage for food. There was no stimulation. It was very worrisome because all he had to do was just pace back and forth. And he was chained for 17 hours a day, and there was no water body. So just so many things that didn't align. And the primary thing about Shankar was that he was in solitary condition. He had no visual or auditory contact with the other Asian elephants. So, elephants are incredibly social animals. So that was the main reason why I decided to focus on Shankar and not the other Asian elephants at the time. And yeah, and you mentioned Rambo. I had also visited Rambo, and his condition's obviously not good, but it is better than Shankar because he can see the other elephants. So that's why I decided to start with Shankar. And yeah, so that's sort of how it started. We started the change.org petition in October, like you mentioned, and we started a social media campaign, getting support from domestic and international animal welfare organizations, and sending letters to the zoo, and that's how it progressed.
So you mentioned this particular letter that you've sent to the zoo, and I've seen it, and it's pretty detailed. There's something that caught my eye there, and you mentioned this whole concept of personhood, and I see your social media posts, and you keep talking about that. Can you just explain a little about that? What is personhood and how does it work when it is associated with elephants, especially?
Yeah, I think the primary example of personhood right now would be the Happy case happening in the Bronx Zoo in New York right now, and that's sort of how I heard about it. Basically, the lawyers, non-human rights organization, are filing a habeas corpus, which is usually for a human, in the case for Happy the elephant, saying that she has the right to be free of confinement and she's just illegally imprisoned. So that sort of raised the question of should animals also have legal rights and what would that entail? And obviously it's a very complicated subject because, if an elephant gets rights, then what does that mean about other animals? What does that say about domestic animals like dogs and cats? What about meat? Are we still allowed to eat it? Farm animals, so many, nuances and implications. But I think the general principle of an animal having a right to freedom is very important. And I know in India itself, it says that, in India, they say some bodies of water and rivers, they have legal rights. So I was just wondering, would that also apply to animals? And the main thing was just for Shankar, we think the right to freedom was very important, especially given that it was against the legislations. So that's how we came up with, we included personhood, but we decided to go with the route of the public interest litigation just because it's more, practical and it might be faster. But we think a habeas corpus in New York is, sending a very important message about personhood.
So, I understand that this began during the pandemic but at an age where most children are bogged down by, school work and, homework, and parents might be more bothered about how you're utilizing your time. Are you learning more? There are tuitions, extracurricular activities, so many things to learn, so many new classes to go to. So, what was the kind of reaction from your friends and family when you started doing something like this? I'm assuming it was encouraging, but can you talk, a bit more in detail? Because it's possible that a lot other youngsters, they might want to follow your path, but they might have to convince their, immediate family, friends about what they want to do. So, if you could just talk about that.
Yeah, I think the reaction from my friends and family has been very, very supportive, especially from my parents. My mom usually helps with social media and my dad with the legal work. So that's very helpful of them. And I think generally what's helpful is that Youth for Animals is collaborative and we do have multiple volunteers. So it's not like, the burden is completely on me because everyone is helping out, everyone's contributing. I'm just, amplifying their work along the process, and very grateful to have a lot of help from mentors as well, because they're very, supportive in, the real world aspect, like how can we convince the court? What do we include in the petition? So I think building that network of support was really important. And I think in terms of, the younger generation or the youth, I think it's very inspiring for me to see people my age who are doing amazing things with, environmental conservation and animal welfare. And I'm honestly inspired by them. So that's why I started. And I hope to inspire other people younger than me. So we were thinking for Youth for Animals, we could maybe include a volunteer program or have people, take it over once, grow up and go to college. So we definitely want to involve people of all ages, ethnicities, people from all around the world. I think we have a supporter page on Youth for Animals. We have, a 7-year-old to, 80-year-old. So I think being inclusive and diverse in our supporters has been very helpful. But I would say reaction from, close friends and family has been positive. So really grateful about that.
Yeah, that's great, But what about when, let's say, you became more seriously involved because you had to take the legal route, right? You filed a petition in the Delhi High Court. Uh, so if you could talk about, was it difficult? How did you think that that was the best route to take? And did any reactions change when you had to go? Because a lot of people are not really what do you say? They won't really go right into the entire movement. They might just say, okay, we'll help you a little superficially. We are there. We'll watch your back. So what was the reaction like at that time?
Yeah, so just to give background on the legal route, we started in around November. We sent a letter to the Delhi Zoo talking about why elephant captivity isn't justified, and we didn't receive a response. So then we sent another letter to the Ministry of Environment and the PMO's office in the Delhi Zoo, and they didn't respond. So finally, we filed a petition in the Delhi High Court, and we had our first hearing on January 3rd, and then sometime, I think, July 6th. So that was sort of the timeline for it. And I think it was definitely more challenging for the legal route because we met a lot of skeptics along the way because they said, the Delhi Zoo, the Delhi government would never agree because, you have to work with the government, not against the government, which I'm not saying we're working against the government, but it's about, we wanted to offer an ideal solution, not just, a lot of people were saying, oh, the Delhi government would only agree for a solution within India. So just stick to that, which maybe that was the outcome. But again, we want to go for the ideal solution. We wanted Shankar to find a home in Africa where he could interact with other African elephants. So I think that was a point we really emphasized in the legal petition, that we did not want to immediately settle for a suboptimal solution. And so those were some of the things we went through with the petition. And just for some of the grounds we worked on, firstly was the 2009 circular, and then there was also a 2014 rule that elephants cannot be solitary for more than 6 months in a zoo. And it had been, 16 years for Shankar. So that was one of the main ones we went off of. So, and just to summarize, in our last court hearing, they ordered a medical inspection of Shankar, and we'll have our next hearing in late August. So, I guess we'll see what happens.
Yes, I really hope that, the judgment, whenever it happens, is in our favor, your favor. Okay, so tell me a bit about, the volunteers who've been with you. In what capacity are they helping you? How are they a part of Youth for Animals? What are the various activities that you all have been doing to get attention to this particular campaign?
Yeah, so on our website, we have around 7 listed volunteers, and they're about my age, maybe a few years younger. And I started Youth for Animals with another girl, Nandika from Shriram. So, everyone's been contributing. We started out by, writing articles, doing artwork, and we had a interview series, zooming in with the experts. So we sort of carried that through. And we also have a lot of supporters. People they keep coming and going, not really official volunteers. So for example, we had a art campaign for Shankar for ages 5 to 15-year-olds, and kids drew their interpretation of Shankar's confinement. So we had sort of an array of, different, interpretations from younger kids. So that was a way of emotionally involving the public. And we also had the Diwali campaign video where kids or even adults lit a diya for Shankar. And I think those were some of the activities we did. And other than just posting on Instagram and Twitter and LinkedIn and everything. So that's how we sort of involved other people.
Okay, that's great. And I think art is one of the best ways to bring people together. You're right, because I remember that, when I was writing about Mosha, the elephant, and I think it's the whole elephant parade, the art movement that it's just taken the whole world by storm. Even in India, there were art installations. A lot of famous artists got together and they painted the elephant figurines. It was just wonderful to go and see those 100 elephants, Yeah, so that was great. Yeah. Okay. So, what were the kind of challenges? I know you just told me that some people were a little skeptical, but did everybody take you seriously, Nikita? I mean, considering that it's a student-led initiative, do you think people thought, okay, there are a bunch of kids, what could they possibly do? Or do you think that, they thought, okay, let's give them some amount of superficial answers and they leave after that, did those things happen?
I think for most of the part, no, because people were very supportive. But yes, there were several, individuals or organizations who saw our view as more utopian and said it's not feasible, it's not practical, which I think it's of course important to be practical, but being ideal is just very important part of making good and optimal change. So we sort of just kept pushing and persevering. But I think one of the main challenges for the youth in making change is that, lack of credibility. So something I did was just investing in research. So that's when we sort of, went into the science of elephants and the legal research, and we try to find more tangible things we could talk about rather than solely an emotional appeal. And I think that's what sort of allowed people to take us more seriously. And we also asked people for support letters from organizations. So it's sort of a chain reaction effect. Once you have one support letter, you go to another person, say, we already have a support letter, and then it just keeps going on and on. So I think in terms of gaining credibility, we were able to overcome that challenge. And also when we were finding a sanctuary for Shankar, I would say that was one of our huge challenges because we emailed around, a dozen sanctuaries. Either they didn't have space or just Shankar wouldn't fit in. Integrating a male African elephant is very difficult. So it was a huge challenge to find a sanctuary who was willing to accept him. But eventually Aspinall Foundation kindly agreed to do it. So that was really helpful. So I think, yeah, those were our main challenges.
Okay. So, what were the other ways in which, because I remember that you have been constantly reaching out to a lot of conservationists, elephant experts, conservation organizations. So, you just mentioned a few, but were there any other ways in which they have, joined your movement? I remember seeing a few celebrities also participated, So if you could talk about that, how did you reach them? Was it easy to convince them? What was it like?
Yeah, I think we had like John Abraham and Pooja Putt, I think, just supported the campaign. And I don't know how they noticed us, but I think they're already animal activists. So just seeing the campaign, they just wanted to amplify the message. And that was very helpful in terms of our petition online. And for the organizations, we had Federation of Indian Animal Organizations, which who were very helpful. World Animal Protection, Blue Cross, Pro Elephant Network, just to name a few. Something we tried to do is reach out to international, African animal welfare organizations, because one of the other problems we saw is that we didn't want to look at the situation from just an Indian perspective, because in the end, Shankar is an African elephant. His needs and needs are different than Asian elephants, and people sort of sometimes ask us, why can't you just put them together? But they're different species in the end, and they're not going to mesh well together. So, for example, in the inspection they've ordered for Shankar, we were advocating for an African specialist to be involved in it, since that perspective is very important. So I think gaining support from Pro Elephant Network was very helpful in that. So yeah, I think that was the support we got from organizations, and we reached out for media support, which was very helpful. With BBC and ABC News. So it was it was nice to talk to them, and yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of people came together to help you with the whole thing. And I think that's just wonderful. And that's the whole spirit of World Elephant Day in that sense, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what kind of future plans do you have? I know you've begun with Shankar, but so what is it? Are you going to focus only on elephants, or are you hoping to slowly, talk about other animals and captivity in general, other conservation issues? How do you see Youth for Animals in the near future?
I think that, for now we're focusing on Shankar, but definitely we're going to be focusing on broader topics, just animal cruelty. I don't have a specific, cause in mind, but one thing we're going to do, which I wanted to mention for, the supporters and community, was that there are many other elephant activists who are doing amazing work across the, world. like Billy in the LA Zoo, Lucy in the Canada Zoo. So it's a very nice community of people who are always supporting each other. So I think one, part of Youth for Animals would be amplifying their causes and doing more interviews with them, because we really want their messages to be heard, to set a precedent for elephants around the world, because we're not only focused on India. And like I mentioned, maybe having a volunteer program for the younger kids. And also, one thing I guess we wanted to focus on was education. We haven't really looked at that, but a lot of people I've talked to have said, what are your thoughts on integrating animals in our curriculums? And I think it's very, very important. So maybe focusing on how we can talk to schools about it, maybe organize debates and those events where we build compassion and knowledge at an earlier age, instead of having to do it later. And then we think that would align with our mission to slowly phase out zoos, because zoos exist because of the demand, especially of children. So
Yes, you're right. Actually, yeah, that is what I was going to ask you next about, education. So, is there something, some kind of, support that you receive from your school or the other volunteers and their respective schools or teachers? Have you all been able to reach out to a larger audience in your respective alma maters in that sense?
I think, yes, in my school at least, I know that we have a club for animal rights. So I, did a presentation there about Shankar's case, and just telling everyone about in that perspective. There was awareness, but I think more work still needs to be done in terms of the curriculums, because so far I or other people and other volunteers, they said they haven't learned about animals in any class whatsoever, except for just a mandatory page in ecology or something about how they're in the carbon cycle. But there's so much more to animals than that, and I think it would be very important to build knowledge on that. Especially how animals are very important in maintaining our ecosystems, like services, and they're just very key to sustainability and our own flourishing. So I think many people, especially coming out of school, I didn't know that myself. I didn't know that animals, when we're discussing things like climate change, animals aren't seen as key stakeholders. We're focusing more on forests and oceans, but I also learned about how animals are important to climate change. So I think including, topics like that would be very helpful in schools. But it's not an audience I would say we have reached so far with our campaign. Oh, I think you're
Yeah,
muted.
yeah,
Or,
sorry. Yeah, so yeah, I think it's a brilliant idea, but I'm just wondering, so what kind of stakeholders do you think could join you? So do you think a book like this could help, or, do you think authors, storytellers could play a role in this?
yeah, we were thinking of maybe making a children's book about not youth for animals, but just in general, children's books with stories about animals in a more compassionate way. But I feel like the book itself already does that. So I think yours would be a great, example of what we could need in education more. Because just thinking about like the first impression of your book, I think one of the things it's very educative about, it's a very comprehensive and educated review of elephant history and mythology, and just their role in our lives. So I think that was one of the things that I really liked about your book. And also, um, yeah, I think also the fact that it's a storytelling approach makes it more accessible to younger readers. So I think definitely integrating that in our schools' libraries and public libraries, online forums would be very helpful. And yeah, and I think that, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. So, what was your first reaction when you saw the cover? I mean, what did you think of it?
I actually really like the cover because I like that it's divided into, the forest and the circuses,
Yeah.
sort of showing the multifaceted aspects of elephants. I really like that the elephant's face is in the forest because it looks
Yeah.
happy then. I don't know if it was intentional, but
It
it's
was.
right. Yeah, it's really good, the symbolism and also the color changing, sort of representing it. The blue color sort of shows that it's not natural in that
Yeah.
environment. So
Yeah.
yeah, I really like the cover. So I think another I already talked about, how I liked, the educative aspect of your book, but I also liked how you it is sort of activist in my opinion, and I see it as action oriented because the way you've included facts in there, it's not just passive reading, but it also encourages and enables the reader to make changes. For example, when you talk about, I remember circus elephants, you have facts like they use like bull hooks, and then you're giving them that information. You're not explicitly saying that elephants in circuses was wrong, but you're enabling the reader to make that interpretation on their own and just giving them the seeds so they're able to sort of make those inferences. And you do provide, suggestions in the end for what readers can do. So in that way, I do think it's very action oriented and not just educative. Another thing I really like about the book in general is how you're providing different, which I think we've talked about before, but you're providing different perspectives to each argument. I feel like when, for example, again with the circus elephants, you weren't, just outright hating on, oh, they shouldn't be used, but you were providing also the owner's perspectives on their dialogue, how they perceived it would be useful to their entertainment. So it's providing more background perspective, and I think it's not painting humans in just a very single monochromatic light, which I think is important in discussing animal activism. And you've also mentioned how it was difficult to integrate different, conservationist perspectives. So I think that was another thing I really enjoyed about the book.
Yeah, because I realized while researching that, the whole human elephant association, it was never just, it was always multifaceted in that sense. There were various emotions involved. So it just didn't make sense talking about one aspect or, saying that humans are always in the wrong or elephants have completely changed over time. It just didn't make sense. So yeah. Yeah. So do you
Yeah.
have a favorite elephant or story from the book?
Yeah, I think a couple. Well, firstly would be the diplomatic gift, since it's, related to Shankar, about how Nehru gifted the elephant to the Japanese school kids, and how I mentioned before how I liked the reasoning behind it. He said it embodied the qualities of India. The means of doing that are, I don't agree with, obviously, but in the spirit, it is shows that elephants were very admired and respected in India. So I like that aspect of it. And you also mentioned the circular in 2009, how that was implemented. So it's unfortunate that it hasn't been taken into effect, but there were changes you mentioned after, sort of after elephant diplomacy became more popular. And yeah, I also read the one about circus elephants, which I thought were very interesting. I think it was Barner and Bailey circuses was the name mentioned a few times. And I think one of the things I found new knowledge for me was the ballerina elephants. I had no idea that elephants were used in I can't even imagine what that would look like. I suppose it would be, videos on it, but I thought that was just, new knowledge. So that was, I guess, one of my favorite stories. And also about the boxing elephant. One thing I just found interesting: elephants had so many different uses, and it wasn't just, just playing with balls or just being used in circuses, but they were very humanized, as you mentioned, because they were dancing. I mean, they were dancing with humans, and you mentioned there were around 40 to 50 elephants on stage, which sounds very insane. So I can imagine to tame those elephants, they were very cruel methods to do that. So there's also that perspective of it as well. And I was thinking about this, and you mentioned there aren't that many circuses anymore, but elephants are still required, still tourist attractions, and they still paint, and we're offered opportunities to like bathe them, and I've ride them. I've seen them a lot in India, and a lot of kids my age or whatever, they don't realize that what's going on behind the scenes, just like I didn't know before I researched it. So that's why I think books like yours and general educative tools are very important in changing wildlife tourism, because it is like circuses, just a more mild version of it, and it isn't as outright cruel as it's portrayed, but it's still as it should be important as well.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. I think that was a lot of these things were new to me as well when I was writing the book. Even I didn't know about the ballerina elephants. And like you said, even the diplomatic gifts, I'd heard about it, but to understand the whole logic behind it, again, it took a lot of research and yeah.
Yeah.
Somewhere I was very happy since you mentioned the diplomatic gift, because there a bunch of school children wrote letters to Nehru to get the animal uh, into a zoo. And
Right.
then if you read the story of Jumbo, you again have, school children and local people who pooled in money to not let Jumbo leave the zoo that he was already in and go to America. So they did that. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. And from those years, we are here today talking to you, who's, making these petitions to get the animal out of the zoo. So I just see this whole, cycle, and it's very
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So,
Yeah, I think it sort of highlights how important, how influential younger people were in
yes.
making those decisions. A lot of these practices have been fueled by their demand. So I guess that makes education even more important in sort of shaping animals and what it means for them in captivity.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so, a few quick tips if you would want to give today's youth to do the kind of work that you are doing.
Yeah, I think the main thing that I go by is just you can start small, you can start local, and it's really about making a ripple effect. And one of your main goals should be inspiring other people, because that's how, in my opinion, change amplifies. And so it doesn't have to be anything big, just it can just be, one elephant, one animal, one cause, your decision to maybe change your diet, like that is still meaningful. I think one of my biggest advice would be that you can start local and you can start small. The point is, you don't have to, just have like this big change, have a big vision instead. And it's more about the ripple effect that you're setting. And like one of your goals should just be to inspire others, because that's how change is created. And for example, I was inspired by someone else. So just creating that chain reaction is very important. And also, gaining credibility is one of the main challenges as a young person. So, my advice would just be being persistent and resilient, but also engaging in scientific, legal backed research, because in the end, knowledge is power, and it's what's going to gain you that credibility in the end. So I think that would be my two main pieces of advice.
Yeah, okay. So do you want to talk about the few people, or, the few youngsters who inspired you?
Well, it wasn't someone young, but it was another campaign for an elephant. It was for Calvin, who was in the Islamabad Zoo, and he was released, and he's now in the Cambodia Zoo, and he's very happy. So I think that was one of I that made it seem like there was a possibility that you can do it. So that's how I was inspired.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. And yeah, I think we've it's just wonderful because, I did see your website, and like you mentioned, there was a 7-year-old, who used art, and this 9-year-old. So yeah, it's not something that's impossible, although I don't know if, when I was younger, the thought would have even occurred to me. So it's really inspiring in that sense to see that today's generation is very much clued into these things, and they understand the kind of route that they should take. And I'm glad that you found support in your family, your friends. You have volunteers who are as invested as you are in this movement. I think that's just brilliant, Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. And the work you're doing is amazing as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So, everyone who's listening to us, please go and take a look at Youth for Animals website. Follow Nikita, follow YFA, and do your bit, even if it is just sharing a story, share a post. If you would like to do more, please get in touch with Nikita. If you would like to write stories, you could get in touch with me. And those of you who would love to read stories, please go and get your copy of Trumpet Calls, Epic Tales of Extraordinary Elephants. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's available at all leading bookstores. Please support your indie bookstore. So just pick up the phone, call them up, and ask them if they have a copy. It's also available on Amazon and Flipkart. And I hope all of you understand the kind of problems that elephants are facing today. Yes, worship them if you want to, but also treat them with equal amount of care. Yeah. Nikita, any last words?
No, thank you so much for inviting me. This was a great opportunity to speak with you. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening, and happy World Elephant Day.